Good morning, Jane. So I hope you're well.
Oh, yes.
Good, good. Well, I'll do a little introduction here. So my name is Michael Fullerton. It's February 25th, 2021. And today I'm going to be interviewing Jane Lundin, who is a board member for the Berkeley Co-op. I myself was the co-editor of the Co-op News from 1976 until 1988 when the co-op closed. And I think that covers things pretty well for the introduction. So Jane, let me see here now. So how long, Jane, have you lived in this area and what kind of work have you been doing?
I've lived basically my whole life. I grew up in San Francisco, was born there.
Okay.
Came to Cal, married and spent a few years back east for my husband's first job. And then he came back here and worked the rest of his life. It was here and I've stayed on. And what kind of work have I done? Oh, all kinds of crazy things. A lot of real estate, a little bit of sales and investment and things like that.
Okay, great. So how did you become involved with the co-op?
Oh, well, I started out as a shopper. We got back to this area in about 1958 and I joined. My number is 15221. And I think I got involved with the Shattuck Center. I know I was on the center council and ended up co-chairing it with Joanne Minner. It was my first introduction to the factions.
Okay. And when you first were shopping at the co-op and on the center council, what did you like about the co-op and was there anything you disliked?
Oh, that's hard to remember. As a married student, the only thing I cared about was the cost of the groceries, and I shopped in all kinds of weird places and certainly never went near the co-op because its reputation was that it was a little fancier and nicer. And I was looking for the last penny to be saved. I loved the produce. I loved the co-op label stuff. It was wonderful to be able to get green label that wasn't icky sweet. I think we ate much more things like canned fruits than you can hardly find canned fruit anymore, but it was good. Those co-op label products, a lot of them were very nice. I thought the thing that stands out that I didn't like was the sudden acquisition of the SIDS chain. It was a sort of wake up that there was a whole political thing going on that I didn't understand, but I thought it was an absolutely dumb thing to do. And I went on being opposed to acquiring stores that way. I voted against the Mayfair deal when I was on the board.
Okay, these SIDS purchase came first, right?
Oh, the SIDS purchase was back in the early 60s, I think.
Yeah, but
we had things going beautifully with 3 centers, and then suddenly they got this crazed idea, and Telegraph was a good idea, but the rest of them were terrible little places that never were going to make money.
Okay. Well, what was your experience like on the center council before you ran for the board?
Oh, I can't really remember much of it. I guess it wasn't friendly enough that Joanne Minner became a friend. I noticed her obit a couple of years ago, and I was sorry to see that she died. I couldn't see really why it was a problem. We split the vote, and it was my idea to just co-chair it. That would be easier than trying to battle for the odd vote for one of us to win. And I didn't see why I should resign. And she wasn't volunteering to resign. But I remember it was kind of fun. You got to work with the center manager on little local issues that you thought would make the store better, or problems people had brought up.
Yes, as I remember it, each center had a center council.
Yeah.
It was elected by the members at that center. I myself started as a education assistant at the Telegraph Avenue Co-op. So I was also involved with the center council there, and we would meet once a month. The center manager would meet with us and together with the elected members and discuss, as you said, issues related to that particular store. And we could make recommendations to the board of directors if we wanted to. And yeah, and then we would also I would send in little items as an education assistant from our center about things that were happening there.
I never found the documents that I thought I'd saved. This interview has been a good thing. My storeroom has been cleaned out. And there are something like 18 boxes of unneeded records that are piled up to take to the shredder. But I never found any more co-op material. So all I have is a year of the co-op news. Because at the end of my tenure as president, the education department presented me with it.
So what year were you elected to the board?
Oh, I think in 71.
Okay.
Then I ran for re-election in 74 and was president in 75.
And was that your last year, 75?
No, there was another year, and there was sort of a deal among the progressive people on the board and our supporters that we would each get a crack at being president. So Linda Coolian was to take over after me. And the strange thing happened at the board meeting where you do the election. Obviously, I was going to vote for her and the other people who volunteered to have offices. You know, you had a treasurer, which was sort of a nominal official, I think, and a vice president who signed all the stock certificates. My signature went to hell the year I was vice president, and it's on my lap, not looking at it, signed endless certificates of participation, I think they were called. Anyway, Jerry Rubin was the head of the moderate faction, we call him. Not the Jerry Rubin, but somebody from Marin with the same name. And he came to me and said that he and his other members would vote for me. And if I'd vote for me, I could go on as president for another year and maybe we could work together better. And I've always wondered if I'd done that, I would have been looked at as, you know, totally self-aggrandizing, and it would have been a horrible, you know, you didn't stick to your word scene, and I didn't do it. But I've always sort of wondered, could we have moved the co-op a little tiny bit towards more small C cooperation?
Yes, that's interesting. I remember Linda Coolian well, and it's interesting that you're thinking, how might things have changed a little bit if you decided to do that? But I certainly understand that many people would have considered you a traitor to do that and not agreeing to the normal procedures as to who would be the next president.
I think I might have, if I'd had a little more time, my imagination might have kicked in.
Was the purchase of the 3 Oakland stores, I guess that was the Mayfair deal.
Yeah.
And was there other stores as well, or just those 3 Oakland stores?
Oh, No, I'm not sure if it was 3, but yes, it was the Oakland, Mayfair was the Oakland expansion.
Well, there were
One of
definitely,
them very close to the Telegraph Center, and a couple farther along that I don't think I ever had much to do with.
yes. Well, you're right. The North Oakland Center was quite close to Telegraph, and there were the 3 Oakland stores. There was North Oakland, MacArthur Broadway at the MacArthur Broadway Shopping Center, and one further south on Park Boulevard called the Park Boulevard Center. And that was how I got into it myself. When they acquired these centers, they needed an education assistant at each center. So several of us were trained to be education assistants. And so from 74 to 76, I was the education assistant at the Telegraph Center, and then went on to work at the Co-op News, as I mentioned before. So you said you voted against the purchase of the Oakland stores. Were there other people who voted that way?
I can't remember.
Uh-huh.
I just know there were enough votes from both factions who wanted to go along with it. I saw SIDS as having done damage we hadn't yet dealt with to what was a very lively and profitable and manageable group of 3 stores. It spread us too thin. It involved us in places where nobody had any interest. It got us a bunch of little stores that never were any good. And I thought the whole thing was a disaster. And just because we wanted to serve another group of people who, we didn't have a whole lot of members who couldn't be served at the Telegraph Avenue Center. So the gesture of moving south into Oakland was well intended, but I thought it was going to be just what it turned out to be, another drain on management's time and on our resources.
Yes, in general, I agree with you. The 3 stores were quite close together, actually, and North Oakland was just maybe 10 blocks down the street from the Telegraph Avenue Center. And the stores never did very well financially.
No, the North Oakland people really tried very hard. And I tried to be supportive and to go to their, I always went, they would have I think it was probably in February for Black History, but something like that, a big festive thing out in the parking lot. And I enjoyed going there. And they were eager and hopeful and wanted to make a go of it, but I don't think it was ever going to be.
Yes, well, across the country in general, the consumer cooperatives that sold food have done the best in university communities. Some co-ops like the Arcata Co-op and the Davis Co-op are still going. There's also a co-op group, Puget Sound Co-op up in Seattle that's still going. I don't know exactly.
I think there's a food co-op in Ashland, Oregon, too.
Yes, there is. I've been to that one, actually.
So have I.
Yes, Ashland, where the Shakespeare Festival is. Exactly. All right. So as you were saying, when you were on the board, then you were part of what might be called the progressive slate.
Yeah.
Can you remember other people on it besides you and Linda Akulian?
Oh, yes. Bob Arnold, Larry Duga, Bob Truhaft, Ray Thompson, Chuck Robinson, Doris Morris, Cherie Gaines.
Okay.
My memory's running out. You could remind me of others, maybe.
Though you mentioned already several that I don't recall. I recall some of the ones you mentioned. Yeah.
It seems to me that as a group, we all had some political cause that was dear to us, that was somewhat on the left. I'd gotten there through the peace movement, through the Dow boycott. And maybe I can talk a little about that. Bob Arnold was a labor activist. Ray Thompson was Black and was interested in civil rights, of course. And Cherie and Doris and Chuck were also, and Larry Duga had been active in the civil rights movement, though he was basically just a left-wing lawyer in True Haft's orbit.
Can you recall who besides yourself opposed the Oakland purchase?
No, I can't.
All right.
I may have been alone in my glory. I remember asking that it be a recorded vote. And when the internet first came on, I looked up my name, as I suppose every vain person did. And what came up was I was mentioned in a sermon at the Unitarian Church by the then minister. And I was recorded as voting against the Mayfair purchases in the co-op.
Right. Well, I think I tend to agree with you that in retrospect, it was a mistake. One of the things that would happen with these stores that were further away was the board, I think, was often reluctant to close them, because once they'd recruited members at those stores, they felt that they would be deserting those members.
Well, the members certainly felt that we would be deserting them. Yeah. And made themselves heard.
And so during the time that you were on the board, then who was the manager? Who was the manager of the co-op?
Well, I mostly remember Ray Bryant. He was hired while I was on the board, and there was a previous man whom I had liked, and I forget now why he left. It's a long time ago.
It might have been Gene Manila. I'm not
No,
sure.
Gene Manila was the original manager that I think we were all convinced was not doing a good job. And part of the factionalism came from personal support from him, as opposed to people who had no particular investment weren't members of the Finnish group, weren't involved back in those early days of the co-op.
Well, I remember Roy Bryant well.
Yes.
He was a very friendly fellow. He was probably, in my view, he was probably the friendliest of the managers that came after, friendlier than the managers that came after him. If he saw you, he always took an interest in you and said hello in the store and that sort of thing.
Well, I think that's part of being a good leader in a commercial situation. You have employees and you don't want to treat them like the furniture. You know, you need to be involved and caring about them if they're to be good. It's part of making an organization work.
And during the time you were on the board, was Don Rothenberg the education director?
Yes.
The whole time?
Yes, he was.
Yes, he was the one who hired me as an education assistant. And I was trained by Van Gielkens, who you may remember as well.
Yes, Van Gielkens is still alive.
Yes.
Too many of these people are not.
So when you were on the board, what did you, besides the question of the Oakland purchase, what did you think the board did right and what did you think they did wrong?
The typical pattern of board meetings was that the general manager presented a report with the typical sort of spreadsheet with the results for each center and various categories of income and expense and a bottom line. and the board members would raise questions. There's always this impression that we were all there because of our causes. And in fact, everybody was there because they loved the idea of the co-op and the fact of it and didn't want to see it go downhill. And in the case, say, of Bob Arnold, who you think of as this labor activist, I always remember him with a laboriously hand-typed spreadsheet showing how things could be different and highlighting particular problems. And he was very, very concerned with how the operations ran. He wasn't there to do something for labor. He was there because he was concerned about the co-op. A board like that should be a policy board and should, I believe, hire a general manager and let them manage. And I think we tended to get too involved in small decisions which didn't have policy implications. If the general manager had come and said, well, it's too expensive, we're going to get rid of kiddie corrals and stop shelf labeling and stop this and stop and have no more education department, that would have been a policy question. It would have affected the nature of the place as a co-op, and we would and should have dealt with it. But questions of staffing at the Castro Valley store on weekends, to exaggerate only slightly, were not what we should be doing, should have been doing.
And you think the board sometimes spent too much time on questions like that?
Yeah, I do. Members would bring up questions. And I found dealing with all the, I mean, I don't know how to run a grocery store, and I wasn't there to try to run it. I was there to try to implement what hopefully were the members' desires on a policy level. Should we have a workforce that represented the population in terms of other people than white men? Because when I joined the co-op, the staff was white men. Well, there were Asian men in the produce department. It was all pretty stereotyped. And one of the things I did before I ever got on the board was work on the personnel committee. We wrote an affirmative action plan that included women, which was rare then, not just minorities. One of the things I think the board did not do well enough was take seriously the work of committees or encourage it. Though our affirmative action program was implemented and it had good results. I reread that year of Co-op News, and there's a report of the state of the progress that's been made. You know, when I joined the co-op, the only people who could cut meat were white men. And that's clearly, I think we all understand now, not the way life should be.
Yeah, I recall when I was there, by then there were at least some African Americans who were store managers. I remember
we made progress quite quickly under the affirmative action, especially because we expanded so that it was possible to do it. Though each time you expanded, you took over stores with traditional staff and had to deal with sudden oversupply of the standard issue white men. Don't take offense, but that's sort of what we needed more of.
And I also remember Larry Bailey quite well.
Who?
He was sort of in the management, and not a store manager, but above the store managers.
I'm trying to hear the name.
Larry Bailey.
No, I don't remember him.
Yeah, he had a good story about how he worked with center councils when he was a store manager. He said that it was always good to feed them first. so they'd be in a better mood.
The year I was president, we had dinners before board meetings, and I reorganized them so that the member committee concerns came first, so the members could come and go and not have to sit through the endless discussion of spreadsheets. I tried to change all kinds of things. None of it lasted.
That was probably a good idea. I mean, I think the Berkeley City Council often makes the people who attend wait till late into the night to be able to present whatever it is they want to present. And
yes, I've been there at 11:30.
Discourages attendance and participation. Yeah.
Yes.
So again, let me come back to the question of, I mean, we had the stores, the far-flung stores, not doing so well. Were there any other things that contributed to the decline?
It was somewhat of a mystery to me why some people could manage better than others. I'm trying to think of the name. Robert Neptune ran the Associated Cooperatives, and a couple of times he took over as interim manager of the co-op, and suddenly operations would snap into place and we'd make money and we'd look good, and we'd think, why can this character do this and nobody we hire can do it? And I don't have an answer.
Yes, I remember him well, and I think.
Well, let's be frank, he was a thoroughly unlikable person.
Yeah, but
he left people angry in his wake.
Yeah, when he retired, and the head of the Associated Cooperatives finance department, E.J. Kashawasi, retired. They both retired at the same time, and I think that contributed to the decline.
Oh, that was after my time, and things have gotten worse.
But he had managed the Associated Cooperatives, the warehouse that supplied the co-op label and other goods, for a long time. And as you point out, he was upgraded to the manager of the Berkeley Co-op a couple of times when other managers departed. And I can imagine that he had a long, long history with the co-op. He started with it, I believe, back in the 30s.
I think so.
Yeah.
And of course, it was easy to make AC look good. It was a cost plus operation. You just bought the things that cost and paid a markup to cover expenses. The stores did.
But when he left, there was a new manager came in there who didn't get along with the manager at the Berkeley Co-op at all, and they were in the same building.
I know, they ended up with a wall between them. Yes,
they ended up with a wall between them. And one of the issues was the manager of the Berkeley Co-op felt that the co-op label was sometimes too expensive and wanted to buy other brands on the shelf. But the pure co-opers, thought that was terrible, and the co-op label should always come first, regardless. So, but in any case, those two people, I think it was named Lawrence Johnson at AC and Lynn McDonald at the Berkeley Co-op, as you were saying, did not get along well, and eventually there was a wall put up between the.
I've only read about the wall. I never saw it. I was well out of the co-op. At the point I stopped being president, my father was dying. It turns out both my parents would be dead within a year and a half. I had kids creeping into the teens, with all that adds to your life. And I didn't have time to worry about the co-op. I cannot remember a single thing about the last year when I was supposedly still on the board. I suspect I didn't contribute much.
Well, after you left the board, did you continue to shop at the co-op?
Well, I'd long since turned the shopping over to my husband. I couldn't go without being stopped. It would take 3 hours to get through a shopping trip because people knew who I was and wanted to talk to me. And the 3 hours is a slight exaggeration, but it was exhausting. And so I figured out that he would really enjoy doing the shopping, and I would make lists and he would go do it. Being a willing person, I'm not sure he really enjoyed it. But anyway, I wasn't doing the shopping.
So at that point, even though you were not on the board anymore, people knew you and they all wanted to talk about how.
Well, when I was on the board was when it all started. He'd been shopping for a number of years, but I don't have a memory of going and shopping for food from that period because I wasn't doing it. He was.
Did you start shopping yourself after you left the board, or did he continue?
No, he continued doing the shopping.
Right. So during your time on the board, was there anyone on the staff or on the board who had a big, more than one if you want, who had a big influence on you?
Well, Don Rothenberg. He was quite a wonderful person. He had a history in left politics. I can remember pictures of him as a very young man on the working on the defense of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. He had a long series of left associations in the country. And he was just a very interesting person they had. He and his wife had a big family of his, hers, and ours children, and gave wonderful parties. And I spent, it seems to me, a fair amount of time sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee talking about all kinds of things besides the co-op.
Yeah, he was, of course, my boss, and I liked him a lot. He was very enthusiastic and outgoing person. Yeah. And one thing I remember about him politically was I believe that he worked on the Henry Wallace campaign. Yeah, Don was a very charismatic fellow, a nice fellow.
He's the person who stands out. I had a lot of fun working with Roy Bryant. You know, we took up selling liquor the year I was president, and I got to go to Oakland to the federal offices there and sign my life away. You would be amazed at the number of documents you have to sign as president of an organization if it's going to start in selling liquor. There are the most minute regulations about the kind of locks and fences and partitions and systems to control, because the feds tax liquor. And sort of, I think, left over from Prohibition, sort of we want to control, though in fact we don't control at all how much gets out and who drinks it. But there are just layers of crazed security around selling liquor. And I can remember going to Oakland with him and spending the better part of a day signing my name.
Who did you go with? I missed that.
Roy Bryant.
Oh, I see.
General manager at that point, and he saw a good profit potential in not letting all the people who wanted a bottle of gin go to Safeway to get it when they should be able to get it off our shelves equally well.
Yes, and if they were to go somewhere else to get it, they'd be buying other things.
Yeah, exactly.
That argument seems quite strong to me, for sure.
Yeah, but no, I thought it was a perfectly sensible thing. You don't have to buy it if you don't want it. And we've proved that Prohibition doesn't work. So let's not argue about liquor. There was some little old lady, probably younger than I am now. But anyway, she was number 683 or something amazing. And she was desperately opposed to our doing it. I lent her my column, and the point of my column was to lend it to members who wanted to speak to other members. And she got to write a column about how she felt.
So that was the column perhaps in the Co-op News,
Yeah, I had a weekly column on the Co-op News.
even though, let's see, well.
I think you started the year after.
Yeah, I started the year after. So I wouldn't have seen your column or the people that you lent your column out to. The columns I remember in particular were the weekly columns by the Co-op home economists on consumer issues and nutrition and
Oh,
that
yes.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I don't believe, at least I can't remember it, I don't believe that the other presidents of the board had a weekly column like you.
Nope, they didn't. I did.
Yeah, that was nice.
I was on a mission to involve members and communicate better with members. And the education department was all for that. So they didn't put any objection. And sometimes it was short and sometimes it was quite long. And they let me have my half a page without grumbling too much.
Well, we definitely involved the members in the Co-op News, and some people thought that perhaps we involved them too much in that we had a letters to the editor section where some people would write quite critical letters, and some people in management felt that maybe those critical letters were discouraging some shoppers. And my co-editor and I at the time had a joke about some of the critical letters. Our joke was that many letters would start out by saying, "I am outraged and appalled at the co-op, ...
Yes, that was a general tone.
Right.
You could,
Well, many
you could get
letters,
those guaranteed.
many letters were praised various things or advocated various things, but some were
yes.
quite critical. Yeah.
And there were people who had, you know, hobby horses that they rode quite regularly. I can remember some of the people and I can't remember what their issues were anymore.
Well, there were a couple of what you might call extreme natural food types who opposed fluoridation, for example. And they did not want it. They wanted to use the Co-op News as a platform to oppose the fluoridation of water, which is generally accepted as scientifically a good idea. But that was one of their issues. And
Well, they were the anti-vaxxers of their day.
Yeah, Alfred Haldane, I remember, and oh gee, there was another one about he's escaping. I can't remember him now.
Well, I remember Jerry Cressy as a very nice person and very interesting, and I can't remember what his big issue was, but we certainly heard about it.
Jerry Cressy, he had this one idea which might have worked, which he presented, which was to make the Associated Cooperatives building out there a store, kind of like one of these stores that have since gone in to the grocery business, sort of a low-cost store that sold large things in large quantities.
Well, that's of course what took it over.
Yeah,
The thing that preceded Costco, the two of them merged. I can't remember what the other one was called.
Yeah, his idea was that it would be like what Costco was when Costco eventually
That's ironic.
came in. Yeah.
When that first built, when it was in that first building, it always made me kind of nostalgic. You went into the cold room for dairy and things, and I can remember that was the meat department when it was AC, and I could remember where things were. It wasn't that different. Of course, they tore it down and built a new building, but the original store was, you know, they hadn't changed much inside at all.
Yes, that was the building that I worked in for most of the time that I was the editor.
The editorial offices were down there sort of in cold storage with the groceries.
Yes, right. There was the warehouse.
I remember the places being always cold.
I don't remember it as being cold in the
Obviously the offices were
Berkeley Co-op portion, but again, I'm not too susceptible to being cold, so it might have been cold and I just didn't notice. So besides Don Rothenberg and perhaps Roy Bryant, were there any other people who had a big effect on you? Or
Not on staff that immediately come to mind.
so
I, of course, made personal friends. Met them through the co-op, but not that I can recall staff members.
what do you think you learned from your time on the board, if anything in particular?
And aside from answering facetiously about being careful what you ask for, because you might get it, the right to run this place and then not be able to do it. It's the group dynamics of a slate of people who have to all agree if they're to get anything done, because there's no cooperation with the other group, the Democrats and the Republicans at the moment in Washington, or the two groups on the co-op. I don't think I learned how to manage that kind of a situation much better than anybody else was doing. And I regret that, because if I had, I might have been able to do a little more good than I did.
Yes, that's an interesting observation, comparing that the slates had to stay united, and that made working with the other side difficult. And it's similar to, as you say, the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States government today.
Well, if the label and the group become more important than the actual facts on the ground, the laws you're going to pass in Washington or the policies you're going to have in the co-op, you get paralyzed by it. There were probably often compromises and middle of the road solutions that nobody saw, because we tended to talk off in our little separate huddles rather than to each other.
There were two people I remember who, one in particular, who I believe tended to try to work across the aisle, you could say, at the co-op, and that was Margaret Gordon, who was an economics professor at UC Berkeley. I'd had a class from her actually on the economics of health, education, and welfare. And she was on the moderate group, but she was able to work to some degree with the progressives.
She was a very nice person and smart as whip. And I don't think I was ever on the board with her, but I think she was off the board before I was on, but I knew her and liked her.
Well, she worked a bit with a young man who had been a student at Cal and who was in the student co-op and who was later elected to the board, Fred Guy, who I knew pretty well.
I do not remember him.
Yeah, she and Fred, I think, sometimes tended to try to work together to come up with the solution. He would be more with the progressive group.
I don't remember him as a member of it, but what happened after I was off, I really am not reliable in remembering it.
Well, besides the regret of not being able to figure out a way to make the two factions work together, you have any other regrets about your participation in the co-op?
No, I don't have regrets. I have funny memories of some things. all, it wasn't all wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth. There was a lot of fun had along the way. The process of politics, it can be fun. It was a lot of work. You had to go and leaflet in stores. But then I still remember the kid who took one look at me, looked back at the leaflet I was handing out and said, "That's not fair. I have you pinned up over my bed." I was 39 and he was about 17. So I was clearly old enough to be his mother. I assured him that my husband had taken the picture about a month before. It was not using some younger version.
He thought that the photo was a photo of you from when you were much younger or something.
He had thought it was a younger person because he had decided to make it his pinup. But I think it's the only I've ever heard of being somebody's pinup. But I think it's still very funny. I can still see him. It just is stuck in my mind as one of those just delightful moments that you don't expect. And of course, the time somebody was shot in the Telegraph Avenue store while Bob Arnold was campaigning is at the other end of not wanting to do this. I got started, I don't know if I said, but I got started basically because of the Dow boycott. I got started back in involvement in the co-op because I was working with Women for Peace, and we were asking for shelf labeling, not to remove saran wrap, but napalm is an exceptionally cruel weapon. It was being used on civilians, and we just wanted to reach people and say, do you really want to buy these people's saran wrap when they're doing this? Producing it for the government to use. We can't seem to influence the government, but maybe we could influence Dow. So, somebody had a little petition with 100 names and presented it at a semi-annual meeting. And when they didn't get much notice, I got to raise my hand and get recognized and say, well, on my kitchen counter, there's a box with about, I forget if it was 3,000 or 4,000. I put an ad in the Berkeley Bar and I'd gotten lots of responses. And so that's how I got involved, re-involved. And I got to work on the personnel committee. And I think the work that they did about affirmative action had good results. And my reading about the numbers and the improvement in more minorities and more women in better positions. And of course, it was a friendly group. We were all aiming at the same things. Management presented us with a consultant they were going to use to hire some member of the management team. And I remember it was so funny because they were so proud of the personality inventory they were going to use to weed out good from bad clients, possible executives. And having worked on personality inventories when I was a student at Cal, I asked if I could borrow it, and I took the test. And I came out as a good executive if I were a man, but there was a separate key for women. And I was off the charts crazy and to be avoided at all cost if I were a woman applying for the same job. Needless to say, we did not hire that consultant. And that's a sort of, there's a lot of working behind the scenes with other people that was just enjoyable. I put out an enormous bulk mailing for one of the elections it was something like 14,000 names that we had gotten because somebody found a very old list of voters in the trash. I suppose a lot of the addresses were wrong, but enough of them were right that we reached out to people. The side that lost accused us of stealing the membership list or getting an employee to steal a membership list, and we did nothing like that at all, of course. But came up in the candidates night on KPFA. Do you remember the candidates nights? Where you've got
I don't remember that.
every election there was a meeting which members could come to and ask you questions, but it was broadcast on KPFA. Some woman asked me what we could do to get the co-op to carry more organic produce. And I said, well, eat more, and got a big laugh, of course, but it is a market and demand is what drives it, which is what I was trying to say. And that whole issue of mailing lists came, all kinds of things came up. I think working with other people was the pleasure of it. We had goals in common, but it turns out to be hard to keep a faction united, let alone get them to make a united co-op across the factions. That we never solved.
Well, as I remember, there were 9 members on the board of directors who served for 3-year terms.
Yes, and there was a strange alternate system which tended to confuse the issue. The runners up
every year, 3 new members would be elected
or re-elected.
Or re-elected.
You could run for 2 terms.
That's exactly it. Before I came aboard, I think the Dow boycott, was that successful in terms of getting shelf labeling?
Yes.
Yeah. Because in general, the conservative faction in general didn't want to, not sell certain products. They were willing to post signs about products.
They may have eventually been willing to post signs, but they weren't in the beginning.
Oh, interesting.
There was a struck goods policy, which was a little different. I don't think struck goods were, manufactured by somebody where the workforce was on strike. I don't think those products were reordered. We didn't take them off the shelves, but we didn't reorder them. I think I remember how the policy worked, but we didn't ask for that for the Dow boycott. We just wanted a label on the shelves. It was an amazing amount of opposition and screaming and yelling and how that would be the death of the co-op to do that. We kept thinking naively that most of Berkeley was in our camp politically, that we would only gain support by taking these stands, by closing on the Vietnam moratorium day. I'm not sure it wasn't true. It just was bitterly opposed by the other side.
Yeah, the Vietnam War was definitely a huge issue in Berkeley, but I think you're right that most people in Berkeley were for getting out of Vietnam. The sooner the better. There was, of course, the election in 1970 where Ron Dellums, who was an anti-war person, defeated Jeffrey Cohalan in the Democratic primary for the seat in the House of Representatives. I used to send nice little items into the then editor Max Honor.
I remember Max.
And Don Rothenberg wanted someone that worked with Max, because Max was moving toward retirement. So he selected me for that. And that was how I happened to get into editing. It was all through the voter registration, starting out with the voter registration. Yeah.
Well, that was an amazing newspaper the co-op put out, you know, huge amount of content in addition to the ads.
Yes, that's true. It was the weekly advertising vehicle, but it did have a lot of other content. And I sometimes thought that one of the reasons it was popular is it did have other content. And whereas most people on Monday, they got to nothing but bills or things that they didn't really want to see, they would get the co-op news for free. And that did have some interesting content in it. So I think that made them appreciate the fact that the co-op news existed, which was a weekly paper. Stores. At one point, the co-op had a hardware store, kitty corner from the Shattuck Avenue Co-op Center.
Yes, it
And
did.
there was at one point, there was a co-op garage down at Sacramento and University.
Yes.
And there was also a co-op. Co-op got into the natural food business, perhaps by those people, to make those people who were asking for organic food happy, because there was the Co-op Natural Food Center also on University.
That was in one of the Sid's stores.
Was that one of the little stores?
Yeah, that was one of the things that we got with Sid's, I think.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I remember the manager there quite well, Joe Hammerquist. Nice fellow, very hard working. Yeah.
Yes.
So there were a number of other associated businesses that were all part of the Berkeley Co-op.
It was a lovely little children's clothing shop out in the El Cerrito Center.
That might have been a private business, perhaps. Huh?
No, it was run by the co-op.
That was run by the co-op. I didn't know.
It was very short-lived. I would think I was its major patron. I had two little girls at just the right age to enjoy buying clothes for them there in the mid-60s. I loved that center. It was designed as a hexagon so that the shelf length was little and got bigger and bigger and bigger as you went out the radiating aisles. And that drove the studio managers crazy because their whole program is set up for so many linear feet of space on a shelf for this or that product. And they're used to having all the available shelves have the same amount of space, and having to compromise, well, you get less shelf space if you're closer to the center. And it was a whole different, it required a whole different way of thinking, and they were not interested in doing it. And there was a point at which they were going to remodel the store and make it straight across aisles. And I remember I wrote a note to the Co-op News and got it published, and asked that my, yes, I want the store to stay hexagonal. No, it's okay if they change it. Choice, I wanted the box you checked to be hexagonal, and persuaded the Co-op News to do that for me.
About when did that vote take place?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
The El Cerrito Co-op was very new and shiny and wonderful at a point that one of my kids had to go down to Richmond Kaiser to get allergy shots twice a week. And so our program was to go via Kaiser and then treat them to lunch at the coffee bar and an hour in the kiddie corral while I tried to invent some shopping to keep myself busy, and spent money in the children's clothing store because they were having fun in the kiddie corral. Not that I needed to shop.
Yeah, for those who don't remember, the kiddie corral was actually the child care facility that was part of the co-op. And
they were wonderful, great people ran them. And they told good stories, and they had interesting playthings.
One of the people who trained with me to become an education assistant, Sonia Turman, had been a worker at the kiddie corral before becoming an education assistant. So now the El Cerrito store, did we just start that on our own, or did we?
We started it on our own. It was designed, I think, by Walter Ratcliffe or somebody of equal eminence. It was really a lovely store. And when it was torn down for a dumb warehouse building that's been several different hardware and discount stores since, and is sitting there vacant now, next to the freeway.
Do you know if that store in general tended to do fairly well?
It didn't do terribly well ever, no.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think
expansion never worked. If we'd stuck with 3 stores, we'd probably be still shopping co-op.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's true. Because there was a lot of loyalty on the part of the generally progressive community toward the idea of a co-op. And also the co-op did a number of things that made people quite happy.
Yeah, it was a good store and it had good stuff and it represented us well on issues in you know, we were home economists were endlessly testifying. I once testified before a committee of the legislature. Never been so scared in my life. It was about milk pricing, as I remember. Whether there had to be fixed prices for milk or whether you could compete on the price of milk.
Did you go to Sacramento for that?
No, I think I went to San Francisco.
Okay.
At least that's my memory now.
Yeah, I remember there was an issue about whether milk prices should be fixed or not. And you couldn't go below a certain price.
Yeah.
I don't remember the details of the argument on either side.
No, neither do I. But eventually they unfixed the prices.
Uh-huh.
I do believe, but.
Yeah, I think that's right. You definitely see milk on special at stores these days. Is there anything else you'd like to add about?
It's hard to think. I did get invited to rejoin the co-op board run again, late on into the 80s. I think the man's name was Dick Oxtott. Is that a jazz musician?
I think it is.
He volunteered. I was immensely flattered. He called me up and said he'd put on a benefit concert to raise money for my campaign if I'd run for the co-op board and take things over again. And I said, you know, I was immensely flattered, but no, I wasn't doing that. My re-election campaign in 1974 had been led off by a wonderful benefit concert that Julian White played. And I endlessly regretted that we never recorded it. He talked about Brahms and Schumann and played the music, and we had a lovely reception with food afterwards, and all the money was used up in moving the piano and tuning the piano and moving the piano back and all the rest of it. It wasn't much of a benefit, but it was a terribly elegant send-off. And the thought that I would redo it with a jazz concert seemed so nice, but I didn't want the job. I did join the rescue board, or the would-be rescue board for Books Unlimited. Again, at Julian White's request, and that didn't work. We tried to recapitalize it and we failed.
Yeah, for those who are not familiar with it, Books Unlimited was a separate cooperative, a consumers cooperative, which sold books with, as I remember, just the one store.
Had a branch store for a while at the Telegraph Avenue Center.
And the manager was Bob Yamada.
Yes, who went on to be the head of the Berkeley Historical Society.
The other event that I remember quite well at the Telegraph Center was the big 4th of July flea market. That was a yearly event, and it was a very
Yes.
pleasant event. As I remember, they closed the store, and it was just, and individual people would bring booths to sell things. And then I
You
think
got a parking
finally
space.
it stopped because the flea market became a weekly event there at the BART station on Ashby.
Yeah, we had Shattuck Avenue Center had at least one, maybe a series of craft fairs, again with people using parking spaces for booths. I sat down and wrote everything I could think of, and I think most of the things I thought of I've managed to mention. And it was a fun exercise to try to remember. I guess the thing I would like to say at the end is that I don't think the political differences between the two groups in terms of outside political beliefs were very different. I think it became opposing factions with quite a lot of electoral unpleasantness that got in the way of solving problems.
Do you think a lot of it became personal?
Yeah, yes, I do. There was quite a lot of personal unpleasantness and personal dislike. And it seems so trivial looking back on it now, given that the survival of this really valuable institution may have been at least peripherally. I don't think the factionalism killed the co-op. I don't think if the co-op had been healthy as a business, I don't think that could have. And I don't think even as it was, that was the problem. But it was surely a distraction and a terrible waste of energy and not pleasant in the end. There was a lot of unpleasantness within the progressive group, I am sorry to say. Personal attacks and political jockeying and, oh, well, I suppose everything you could find in the Democrat or Republican parties of today. And it seems to me that I think maybe we lacked a leader to tell everybody to step back and focus on what was real.
So we didn't have a Nancy Pelosi or a Chuck Schumer.
We may have had people at that level. I would say Bob Arnold was very much a leader of the left group. Bob Truhaft had been involved, but Bob Truhaft was a wonderful person. I enjoyed getting to know him, and I went on knowing him after the co-op. Spent a marvelous afternoon together, quite by accident, at the National Gallery in London, while he waited while Decca was off talking to her publishers, and we had timed tickets to go to some show, and met each other in the cafeteria by accident, and sat around for much of the afternoon. He was a very interesting and pleasant person, and he taught me how to deal with the press and with candidates' nights and things like that. He used to sit in the back of the room of those candidates' nights with a series of signals like, wrap it up, you know. Very helpful when you've never done anything like that. I used to get cornered by TV reporters in the store. Another reason I stopped shopping after one too many mics shoved into my face. If you shove a mic in, so I do this, and I get excited, and my voice goes up, and suddenly I sound just like Eleanor Roosevelt, and don't look too different either. She was an admirable person, but not for those characteristics. I actually met Eleanor Roosevelt when I lived in New York, but that's a whole nother story. I did not like dealing with reporters asking questions that I'd had no chance to think about.
Did they usually ask in a friendly way, or was it sometimes more hostile?
Not hostile in the sense of having taken a side, but insistent and pushy and demanding of an answer in which, well, damned if I know, is not the right one. You know, is what I've often wanted to say. This only happened to me a couple of times, but it was a couple of times too many.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed it, and I guess you're saying that you did too. And
yes, I've enjoyed this interview. I've wanted to think about the co-op. I think that's the best part of it. I got to think about it all again.
yeah, I haven't thought that much about the co-op. I did do a presentation once at the Berkeley Historical Society on the history of the co-op with some other people. And I had edited this book called What Happened to the Berkeley Co-op. I didn't have an opinion of mine in there, but it was sort of a book of selections of different people's ideas.
Is that the one that George Yasakochi has an article in?
Probably, yes.
There's one of them I
finance
read.
director. Yeah, very nice man.
Oh, George Cuskin. He was wonderful. I should have added him to somebody I remember really fondly from the
I
co-op.
think both he and the fellow at AC, E.J. Kashawasi, they were both greatly missed when they left, when they retired.
Yeah. I actually went to George Yasakochi's memorial in iHouse. It's the last place I've seen any quantity of co-op people. But I'm very glad that you were interested in doing this. I'm not sure I've contributed anything to the annals of the Historical Society. I will give them my co-op newses if they are interested in preserving them.